Good afternoon. My name is Mika Kontiainen and I'm the Director of Disability in the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. I will be your moderator for this high-level event to discuss the newly launched UN Disability Inclusion Strategy, also known as UNDIS. This event is co-organised by Australia and the Executive Office of the Secretary-General and co-sponsored by Argentina, DESA and the 36 members and advisors of GLAD, the Global Action on Disability Network, including UNDP, OCHA and ILO. Today, we will hear from member states, UN entities, civil society representatives on building momentum towards implementation of the UNDIS and an inclusive, accessible and sustainable world for all. Australia has been a consistent advocate for a more disability-inclusive UN and welcomes today's launch of the UNDIS by the Secretary-General. Australia has provided funding through the UN Partnership on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities to support initial implementation of the UNDIS. We encourage other donors to do likewise to demonstrate their support for the UNDIS. On the panel today, we have, from my left, Ms. Catalina Divandes, UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and to my right, Ms. Asako Okai, Assistant Secretary-General of UNDP, Ms. Osa Regner, Deputy Executive Director of UN Women, Ms. Ana Maria Mendez, Under-Secretary-General, Her Excellency Ms. Gabriela Michetti, Vice President of Argentina, Ms. Rina Galani, Director of Operations and Advocacy, OCHA, and Mr. Vladimir Chuk, Executive Director of the International Disability Alliance. We will begin with opening remarks by Her Excellency Gabriela Michetti, Vice President of Argentina.
Madam Senior Advisor on Policy of the Secretary-General, Madam UN Special Rapporteur, Madam Deputy Executive Director of UN Women, dear friends. Just a few minutes ago, I began my speech at the general debate by saying that the first 3 years leading the agenda on the rights of persons with disabilities in Argentina have been the most intense of our history. I am moved as a woman, as a person with a disability, and as the Vice President of my country, of a developing country, to see that the United Nations is launching the political process of UNDIS, the Global Disability Strategy. Thank you, Mr. Secretary-General, for leading this initiative. I wish to share with you that in Argentina, the effective participation of people with disabilities in the decision-making process is possible because the democratic pathway does not stop its course, because neither our civil rights nor our preferences are called into question by the changes in administration, because human rights are a state policy and a conviction of our entire society, and they include people with disabilities, of course. Ladies and gentlemen, no one said that this was an easy task, but here we are having this conversation. From the presidency of Argentina, we created a media outlet called Vidas Reales, Real Lives in Spanish, in order to invest in awareness raising and to increase the visibility of people with disabilities. We understood that the road towards inclusion is paved when we speak to the whole of society, not only to people with disabilities and their families. We must therefore maximize the scope. We need to speak to all those who are still looking without understanding still why, for instance, a global disability summit has been held in Argentina, where thousands of wheelchairs were headed in the same direction. In what context do we lay out awareness raising in our country? As a result of our National Disability Plan 2017-2022 in Argentina, we consolidated the management of disability under a single body, a focal point that will be able to structure the critical pathway of persons with disabilities from their certification to their retirement, through their rehabilitation, access to health, justice, education, and professional training. The National Disability Agency is the flagship entity of our strategy. It is our authority in charge of the implementation of the CRPD. the Secretary General is extending a very special invitation to the entire international community. He is urging us, the leaders of the state parties, to elaborate our own strategy in order to implement the principles of our conventions in a cross-sectional manner. To that end, we need to commit ourselves as states to focus on the management of disabilities, to think in an accessible way, to manage our information, and to prioritize health, education, and of course labor. The only way to do this is through dialogue. This is why we hold conferences like this one, or global summits like the ones in London and Buenos Aires. This conference invites us to underline Article 8 of the Convention to raise awareness. We are gathered here precisely to destigmatize the person and to put their opportunities ahead of their difficulties. We count on all of you. Let's do the impossible so that no one is left behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, particularly for your remarks on the importance of dialogue, which of course this conference represents. I would now like to invite Ms. Menendez to introduce to us the UN Disability Inclusion Strategy. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias, señora vicepresidenta, por su presencia y por...
Thank you, Madam Vice President, for your remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, fellow panelists, it's my great pleasure to be with you to discuss the United Nations system's first ever disability inclusion strategy on this. I'd like to express, first of all, my appreciation to Australia for hosting this important side event and for supporting the Secretary General's commitment to inclusion and equality for all. I'm also greatly encouraged by the strong commitment of member states and our partners in civil society to this endeavor, as demonstrated by your level of participation here today. The UNDIS is the result of an intensive process of review and consultation over the past 2 years. It is also the realization that we need to do more in this area. For the Secretary General and as custodians of the international norms, the UN has a special responsibility. We must lead by example. Early in his term, the Secretary General commissioned a review to assess our performance on disability inclusion. The review was conducted by the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, Ms. Catalina de Bandas, here present. It has benefited also from the engagement of close to 60 UN entities, interagency networks, experts, and civil society organizations, as well as member states. While the findings highlighted examples of good practices, it has also showed that we still have a long way to go. The review did, in fact, shed light on the number of gaps across all UN pillars at all levels, from country to headquarter levels, that we are uneven in our approach, in our use of existing tools and mechanisms, in our strategies, but even more in our understanding of our policies in this matter. The strategy, therefore, responds directly to the review and its findings. It seeks to raise our performance on disability inclusion across the board, but also to ensure that our actions are systematic, coherent, and unified. This was recognized recently when the UN System Chief Executive Board approved the strategy last month. Now that we have the roadmap and the political commitment, our attention must turn to implementation. Indeed, this morning, in launching this strategy, the Secretary General was very clear, and I quote him. He said, "The Andes is not a strategy of words, it's a strategy of action. Action to raise the standards of the UN's performance on disability inclusion across the board, and action to bring about the unified and transformative change we need." End quote. This strategy provides us with a unique opportunity to advance the global commitment of governments and partners to the CRPD and the 2030 Agenda by ensuring the inclusion of persons with disabilities in all areas of the UN work and at all levels. This is a tall order, but it's one that the UN system is committed to achieve. In practice, this means that individually and collectively, we must review and improve our performance across the full range of issues included in the accountability framework of the strategy, from how our leadership responds to disability issues to the place of disability inclusion in our strategic planning and institutional policies, from engaging persons with disabilities in our work to boosting disability-inclusive programming and evaluation, from taking action on procurement, accessibility, and conference services to attracting and supporting persons with disabilities to work in the organization and boosting overall staff knowledge about disability inclusion. Over the coming months, we will be taking a series of steps that will lay the foundation for the Andes implementation. Some of these steps will include setting up a dedicated team, I'm currently working on it, that will help me to focus on the Andes. We will work to help develop clear guidance so that UN entities understand the steps that each one should take to begin the process of rapidly improving overall performance. We will also work with UNDCO and other entities to produce and finalize the country scorecard that will help to operationalize the Andes at the country level with our country teams. We will also establish and formalize a system-wide network of focal points to ensure that we do translate the strategy into meaningful actions across the board. These focal points will also help us identify what investments are needed and where the investments, and address the gaps and challenges, as well as share the best practices. I also intend to regularly convene principal meetings to keep this high-level commitment and momentum, and to monitor progress and see how we can further advance in all areas identified in the strategy. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honored and humbled that the Secretary General has assigned responsibility to me for overseeing early implementation of the Andes. In taking this work forward, I count very much on the combined knowledge and experiences, resources, capacity, and networks of all stakeholders here today. It is essential that we work closely with member states as we roll out this strategy, monitoring overall progress on implementation on an annual basis, supporting UN principles to advance the strategy through the governing boards of UN entities, supporting budgetary or policy changes where needed, working with our resident coordinators to support implementation at the country level. Our partners, civil society organizations, and persons with disabilities themselves have a similarly important role to play, not least in ensuring that our actions are sufficiently ambitious and tailored to actual needs. The private sector, development cooperation partners, and others will also have a key role to play at various entry points. I intend to engage with all of them on a regular basis moving forward. Ultimately, to conclude, this strategy is about the UN living up to the normative standards that this organization has developed these past 7 decades. It is about the UN system recognizing as a whole and across the 3 pillars that a better response on disability inclusion is not a mere add-on, but is central to achieving our objectives of peace, justice, dignity, rights, and development for all. I look very much forward to working with you to ensure this strategy does indeed become a strategy of action. As the UN, we are fully committed, and as the Secretary General said this morning, and I quote him again, he said, "We cannot be a platform for change when persons with disabilities cannot access that platform to speak." I end quote. I count on your support to help us give all of us, and especially people with disability, this platform. Thank you very much.
Under-Secretary General, thank you very much for your informative overview of UNDIS and in particular your personal commitment. It's greatly appreciated. Now the panel will move towards reflecting on the challenges and opportunities and what needs to happen to ensure that the UNDIS is implemented successfully. We will begin with the UN Special Rapporteur. Catalina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and of course I also want to start by acknowledging the contribution of the Australian mission and the government to make possible that we have this side event, and also the establishment of the dedicated capacity, as I will mention. For me, this is a week of celebration. We have been advocating for this UN disability strategy for a long time. We started this process by acknowledging that, as the Secretary General said this morning, when we did the baseline review, the results were not a pretty picture. The organization is not where it should have been. We have ratified the convention and adopted the convention more than 12 years ago, and we still are not there. But I think that one of the most important things that happened over the last year, actually, is that although in the baseline review that I conducted, as was mentioned, with the support also of the Australian government, we did this baseline review and we found that we were lacking mainstreaming, we were lacking capacity, and we were lacking high-level leadership in the organization to be able to advance. And that, I believe, was very important to have today the speech of the Secretary General recognizing, and at the point when he received the findings of the baseline review, recognizing indeed those shortcomings and being very honest about it. And with that, his commitment and the commitment of the administration to solve one of the big challenges we have, the lack of leadership. The lack of leadership that I think now with the designation of Ana Maria Menendez as the one in charge of implementing the UNDIS, it's also being addressed, and the lack of leadership that I hope will be addressed through the rest of the system in the agencies and funds. We have problems with capacity, and we have problems with making sure that all efforts of the UN are inclusive and accessible for persons with disabilities across pillars, as was mentioned also by the Under-Secretary General. The recognition of these challenges, I think, is a first step. The creation of this UN disability inclusion strategy is fundamental to give us a framework of action, to orient, to guide the action of the system into very strategic areas that are needed, of course, accessibility, recruitment, and as importantly, programming. We have to reflect now, from my point of view, and after a very intense process over the last year with the support also of the agencies, and I want to highlight the role that the Interagency Support Group play, and specifically the leadership of UNDP and ILO and the technical work. But I do think that we have to ask ourselves now, what about next? What are the next steps? How are we going to make sure that we're going to be successful in implementing this disability inclusion strategy and making this strategy sustainable? I am very pleased to hear not only about the commitment of the USG, but also about her concrete plans to address the first stages of the implementation. We, of course, need to look also to other issues, and for that we need the support of states, and I'm very glad that we're having this discussion here. It's through your political support, your commitment, and your help that the administration will continue to prioritize in these areas. We need your support now to adopt a resolution so that we request the regular monitoring and the regular reporting of the Secretary General to the General Assembly or to any other forum in which the administration can report on progress. We need that. We need to make sure that the support that the USG will support to create this team, this dedicated capacity to implement this strategy will remain, that this will not only rely on voluntary funding, but that will become a structural part of the organization. And for that, we need the states to look at this and to find ways to provide the financial support and the structural support to make sure that that happens. We need to focus again and rediscuss what are the priorities. Again, I'm glad to hear from the USG how she is already presenting to us her priorities on how to move ahead with it. But I think that the system needs to make a better exercise of identifying which will be those foundational stones to make sure that the rest of the implementation will work smoothly. Where are the interventions and the low-hanging fruit that we can take on board to make sure that the implementation of the strategy will be successful? We have great allies, and I do believe that the states, and for instance, with the creation and the support of the GLAD network, that it's comprised by several donors and states, we will have a strong support. But we also need to have the strong participation of persons with disabilities in anything that is going to be related to implementation of this strategy. Again, I want to finalize by saying I am celebrating this week. I'm celebrating that after years of advocacy and hard work, we managed to get the attention of the system to create this framework, this accountability framework that is going to help accountable the system towards its responsibilities with persons with disabilities. Now we only have to make it work, and I hope that we will do that together. Thank you very much.
Catalina, thank you very much for those remarks. I would now like to invite Ms. Regner to provide the perspective from UN Women. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I also want to thank Australia for organizing this. I want to thank my fellow panelists for their contributions here today. Most of all, maybe the Vice President of Argentina. I used to be the Swedish Minister of Social Affairs and Gender, and we had the opportunity to meet then as well. I want to thank all civil society and everybody else attending here today. Anna Maria, thank you for this achievement. I know how hard you worked, and I know how much you really wanted this to be a useful strategy. And I think we've heard already that it is. Now it's all our responsibility to make it actually also really work and to change lives for women and men, because that is our task at the UN. And UN Women is pleased to see that we think we try to collaborate and participate and contribute to this strategy, and we do see that women's and girls' needs and rights are reflected, and we look forward to working with you on this. As you, I'm sure, all know, about 1 in 5 women and girls themselves ought to define themselves as living with a disability. This, of course, can mean many different things. The spectrum is very broad: intellectual disabilities or physical difficulties. These women and girls are obviously as strong as all other women and girls, and as capable as all other women and girls. However, they are put in a place in society, and in many times in the countries where they live, because of lack of rights and because of lack of attention, because of lack of leadership, as we heard, they many times are found to be the most vulnerable and marginalized persons in society and face discrimination and also violence. We know that when we measure incomes, people with disabilities have in most countries lower incomes than the majority, but women lower incomes than men in the same group. We also see, at least in my home country, Sweden, when we measured benefits to women and men with disabilities, women were actually given less benefits than men. The differences were not enormous, but they should not have been there, and they were there. We also know that violence levels are higher against women with disabilities than against other women, and as you know, they are high in general. We know that political participation is lower for women and men with disabilities, but even lower for women in this situation. We know that education for girls with disabilities is a big problem in many countries. So we think also from UN Women's side, and I'm sure you have opinions on this, that probably both organizations and bodies working with the rights of people with disabilities might have neglected the gender perspective in their work. The women's movement, organizations working with gender perspective, definitely has not paid enough attention to the disability aspect of their work and people, women and girls living with disabilities. We think that this has 3, maybe 4 reasons. First of all, women's needs have been historically neglected in the international and national laws and policies. This now must change. Secondly, there has been a failure to prioritize the collection of data to know all of the situations for women and girls. Thirdly, the organizations, civil society representing women and girls with disabilities are often unable to access funding, and they might not always fit into the normal categories that we have for civil society, for instance. And in addition to this, accessibility and appropriate facilities, as we've heard about here before, to live up to the universal design as the convention talks about, there is still a long way to go, and this hampers women's and girls' participation in this work. I think that the lack of inclusion of NGOs is one of maybe the biggest obstacles here. So therefore, it's very important, obviously, to change these attitudes. UN Women has tried to contribute to this work, and we have taken efforts to promote gender equality and disability action inclusively at all levels. And we have also tried to do so, always consulting with women with disabilities and organizations representing them. On the International Day of Persons with Disabilities in 2018, we launched our corporate strategy on the empowerment of women and girls with disabilities. And the overarching objective of this strategy is to support the full inclusion and meaningful participation of women and girls with disabilities across everything that UN Women does, all UN Women's priority areas, and by reviewing our own accessibility as an organization. So UN Women remains committed to strengthening the UN system's work on women and girls with disabilities, and we believe that the launch of this strategy provides us with a unique opportunity to effectively come together as a system and mainstream the rights of persons with disabilities rights in everything that we do, building on the existing work of the UN. I remember also the special rapporteur spoke to heads of agency and deputy heads of agencies, and obviously, of course, very politely, but also very clearly, pointing out that maybe the understanding of the size of this situation and the challenges and possibilities was maybe a bit varying among the different people in that room. And I think everybody at that time really wanted to be among those who did understand it. So we will all try to really do our best to contribute to that. So I I'm really happy to be here today, and I do think that it's very important that both you and Women does whatever we can to contribute to the policy, and that we now also really try to work with this. We have an example of working with mainstreaming of the gender perspective in everything that the UN does, which is called the UN SWAP. And I understand that the UNDIS has also worked with the UN SWAP as one inspiration, and we have good experiences from that, so I think that really involves everybody. So thank you for having us here. This is not a small thing. It will take a lot for all of us. I think we have to understand that. It is obviously necessary to do that. It is a rights issue. It needs action, as Anna Maria pointed out, that the Secretary General said. And we have to make use of the Convention on the Rights for People with Disabilities, and we have to make use of the concept of universal design. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Regner, and for reminding us of the gender dimension. Thank you, Ms. Regner, for reminding us of the gender dimension on disability, and indeed the broader reminder that disability is an incredibly complex concept, and intersectionality with gender, indigeneity, ethnic minorities has a huge impact on inclusion and exclusion, as does the type of impairment that people with disabilities may actually be living with. Now, I'm actually going to change the order of speakers around slightly, noting that he has to leave shortly. I will invite Mr. Vladimir Chuk to provide a perspective from people with disabilities. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Mika, and thank you very much for giving me a chance to speak before my turn today. Let me indeed start by sharing a celebration of this day that we finally got this UN disability inclusion strategy. We were waiting for this for many years, and we were working hard with the entire UN system for this to really happen. I would begin by recognizing and thanking huge leadership of Secretary General and Deputy Secretary General that were both personally motivated to see this through, and that were constantly putting a very short deadlines for everything that's supposed to happen, so that we can today celebrate. So that will be first on my agenda. Secondly, I would recognize also a small team of special advisors from variety of UN agencies that contributed their time, expertise, and knowledge to work towards developing of this document. So, like I said, we were waiting for a long time for this, and we are very excited to see this being adopted today. This will represent significant change. This will represent a systematic approach of UN system in mainstreaming disability rights, and including persons with disabilities and their rights in whatever is happening in the UN system. There will be 15 targets that each UN agency will need to report on, and there is a variety of targets, and we very much welcome and support the nature in which these targets have been developed through consultation process with UN system, but more broadly, they consulted also with civil society. So we are very glad that we landed on such a set of targets. Particularly, we would like to recognize and to welcome target number 5, which is on consultation with persons with disabilities, consultation and meaningful involvement of persons with disabilities and their representative organizations. This is for us really a small victory within a very large victory to have UNDIS. So what does it mean really for us, and how we see what does it mean for a UN system? First of all, at the global level, we feel that there will be need to significantly increase capacity of the UN system to deliver. We feel that while there are a number of agencies that are delivering for people with disabilities at the headquarters level and the national level, we did not see yet this really for all UN agencies. So what we would see as immediate need is really that the whole system takes it seriously, and to find a way how they can first of all find a technical knowledge within their agencies, recruit new human resources, and to start delivering. We would like also to call for establishment of a network to advise and guide UNDIS. And we feel that this will be very important, especially in the first year. And we would also recommend that the civil society, and particular International Disability Alliance, is involved in this network as well. Further, at the national level, while we are welcoming and we are excited to see this demand, de facto, this moment will create new demand towards all stakeholders, towards organizations of persons with disabilities, towards UN country teams. So there should be probably significant capacity building and significant investment, and very quickly, to be able to start delivering. So we are welcoming this, but also we are slightly concerned how this will be really done, and how much we are collectively ready to welcome UNDIS. But this is a fantastic opportunity, and this is a fantastic challenge for all involved. We believe that there will be need to build capacity of organizations of people with disabilities in order to understand and to engage with UN country teams, but also to build capacity of the UN country teams at the national level. We are standing ready to work with UN to see this through, and to both be those that will be receiving capacity and those that will be building capacity of the UN country team. Furthermore, I would like to share with you that IDA, International Disability Alliance, just implemented the first global survey where we simply asked DPOs how they see engagement and involvement of organizations of persons with disabilities with different stakeholders, including UN. So in the first round, we had 570 responses from 165 countries. 570 organizations responded, and we are going to use this tool to provide one more feedback to UN system, and one more way to measure how we are all collectively delivering and how well are we doing this job. So it's time to celebrate, I agree, but it is time to recognize this moment as a significant opportunity, and to really take it seriously, and to start building capacity that we need in order to build system that will be delivering on a sustainable level. Thank you very much.
Vladimir, thank you very much for your thoughtful insights. I'd now like to turn to Ms. Okai for the perspective from UNDP. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mika. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I echo previous speakers in thanking the co-organizers and other co-sponsors for this important high-level side event on the margin of the COSP. This is indeed a jumping-off point for the UN system. UNDP has been proud to play a pivotal role in the development of the UN Disability Inclusion Strategy together with the ILO and in close collaboration with the UN Human Rights Office. As co-chair of the working group, we wanted to ensure three things that we believe are critical to the success of the implementation of UNDIS. Firstly, to develop UNDIS in a truly extensive and collaborative process. Every effort was made to bring in as many parts of the UN to build a strong consensus around a common vision shared across the system. Secondly, to make UNDIS relevant across all pillars of the UN. Thirdly, to embed disability inclusion across all our operations and programming in leadership, in policy and programming, communications, and importantly, in how we as a UN system walk the talk as inclusive employers. At UNDP, we firmly believe that in order to support disability inclusion and the transformative promises of UNDIS, the issue of disabilities need to be understood as a multidimensional development and human rights issue. Disability inclusion cannot be approached as a standalone. It needs to be promoted across all policies and programs. We know as the world's largest minority group, people with disabilities have been consistently left behind in development gains and in their participation in development processes and decision-making. Supporting implementation of UNDIS at country level will be critical in moving ahead. The foreseen development of a UN country scorecard to provide an appropriate mechanism to support UNDIS in the work of UN country teams will be imperative to maximize mainstreaming, synchronize tools, and ensure a streamlined process at country level. UNDIS is an opportunity for entities to come together to support innovative approaches, to learn from best practices and lessons learned. The UN Partnership on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, a system-wide partnership that UNDP hosts the technical secretariat with 5 other UN entities, can support UN country teams' joint UN work on disability inclusion. As for UNDP, we have been making important strides in disability inclusion for the last 2 years. Our new corporate guidance issued last December, for instance, stipulates the need to mainstream disability in our new country program documents. I am pleased to report that the percentage of our CPDs reporting on disability inclusion increased from 7% in 2017 to 48% in 2018. Another important innovation is UNDP's marker on Leave No One Behind. It includes a category of persons with disabilities as markers for our data analysis of our portfolio, and this allows us to track resources over time. UNDP has worked in more than 90 countries on disability inclusion since 2008. Our new corporate guidance and disability marker will help us further progress in mainstreaming disability inclusion throughout the organization. In closing, I would say that having led the process of development of UNDIS, there is clearly a tremendous momentum internally in the UN system to do more on disability inclusion. At the same time, so much more needs to be done to embed inclusive approaches and the twin and complementary frameworks of the Sustainable Development Goals and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. As we move into implementation phase of UNDIS, we need to build on this momentum created. We need to also ensure strong partnership with organizations of persons with disabilities and member states to support UN effort to implement UNDIS. UNDP is absolutely committed to play our part to make UNDIS a success. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those words, and in particular the commitment of UNDP towards UNDIS. Now, I'll turn over to Ms. Galvani in a moment. She will have the last word from the panel on behalf of OCHA, and then I will open the floor to discussions and interventions from the floor. But first, Ms. Galvani, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and for hosting it. And certainly I'm quite humbled by being able to share this panel with the Minister and other distinguished guests. I work for the humanitarian part of the United Nations, and I just want to give a little story about a recent event we had where we went into a camp in Syria, where it's a camp in the southwest of the country, very isolated, very little around it, hot and dirty. We did an assessment. We were allowed to go after a hard-fought battle. We were able to go to deliver assistance to communities there and to see what else was needed, and perhaps we could hope to return with more assistance. After assessing and talking to community leaders, we then visited the nearby health clinic, if you could call it that, but a health clinic. And there we spoke to professionals who were doing their best to support the communities there. And one of the things that they had said to us is, please, if you come back, make sure you bring wheelchairs. And the assessment team actually looked at each other and said, we were not asked for these by the community leaders. And actually, we didn't really see that many people there who would need it. What's happening? Turns out that there were about 45 children sitting in tents because they actually had been injured and had a disability, were unable to walk, unable to attend school because unless they were carried or given equipment to get there. So they were basically sitting under these tents, invisible to the others. And the community leaders didn't think to actually prioritize their needs because the needs are so vast. And I just say that because even today when we know that out of the 130 million people who are in crisis of some sort and need assistance today, 15% of those people identify themselves with a disability. And yet we're still at the point where in the heat of a crisis, we still don't get that right and help and try and reach the most vulnerable in communities. So today's launch of the United Nations Disability Inclusion Strategy is a massive step forward for all of the pillars of the United Nations, including for those of us who support the system in delivering humanitarian assistance. We know that from experience that crisis exacerbates existing vulnerabilities, and we know that it's the most vulnerable who have additional barriers to accessing these services. Consultations carried out in 2015 for the World Humanitarian Summit found that 3 out of 4 people interviewed with disabilities did not receive, in the heat of a crisis, assistance. We also know that 1 in 2 did not have access to any specialised services that would further their quality of life and their ability to contribute to society. So I fully concur that target number 5 is a real starting point for us. Inclusion at the table at all points is absolutely essential. And I will just say that the disability inclusion strategy demands just this. It demands the system, all of us, individuals working for the United Nations and our partners, to ensure that concerns and experiences of persons with disabilities is an integral dimension of all aspects: design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. And in humanitarian action, we are trying to implement this vision as per the strategy's requirements. What needs to happen on the humanitarian front, and progress has started, but we're just on the edge. We really need to now take this forward and commit to making it a reality throughout the way we deliver humanitarian assistance. We now collect data on the situation of disabled people. I know that this is quite astounding that it's only now that we're starting to do that, but we are. We do, our emergency relief coordinator, Mr. Mark Lowcock, has also prioritised assistance to disability programs through the Central Emergency Relief Fund, which is a fund of the Secretary-General's that provides assistance in times of emergencies. And disabilities is one of the 4 key categories that fund will now prioritise. We need to do much more collectively to ensure humanitarian action meets everyone's needs. And with that, the humanitarian system, with partners who are in organisations that represent the disabled and are made up of the disabled, we are producing guidelines that will actually take the strategy that has been launched today and talk about how to operationalise it. And that strategy is being finalised now and will shortly be delivered. It is important that we move away from considering work with persons with disabilities as a distinct area and move towards full inclusion, being mainstream throughout the humanitarian program. This requires including the voices, as I said, of those with disabilities at all stages of planning, delivery, and of monitoring. The implementation of the strategy will ensure this exclusive humanitarian action, but the accountability framework is essential, and the Secretary-General is demanding of us that we are held accountable to that. Thank you.
Ms. Galvani, thank you very much for those remarks. I'd like to open the floor now for interventions and question and answers from the panel. And I'll turn first to the UK and invite Baroness Biscombe to make a statement on behalf of the UK.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a great privilege to be able to be here today to say that the United Kingdom welcomes this launch and the commitment by the UN Secretary-General to a UN disability inclusion strategy. This is a significant step towards a UN system that is fully inclusive of people with disabilities, and the UK stands ready to support the new strategy. I want to emphasise our belief that mainstreaming disability inclusion into the UN system ensures that UN programmes will reflect the aspirations of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And as the Secretary-General explained so powerfully this morning, now is the time to turn words into action. So we in the United Kingdom support this wholeheartedly and celebrate this huge step change in a changing world. Thank you.
Thank you, Baroness, for that affirmation of the UK's commitment to UNDUS. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you. Now, we have about almost 15 minutes for question and answers and an interactive dialogue from the panel. So if there are any comments from the floor, there are plenty. All right, let's start. We'll start here. We'll take about 3 to begin with, and then we'll turn to the panel and we'll come for a second round.
Yeah, Richard Reeser, Disability Movement in the UK. We also welcome it, but I seem to remember being at some meetings in 2008 and 9 where a similar strategy was put forward and not much happened. So it sounds like this is more deeply embedded, and I'm pleased about that. But a couple of things really to think about in implementing institutional change across the whole of UN. Just recruiting disabled people isn't enough. There need to be disabled people who understand the oppression that we face as disabled people, more than 1 billion people around the world. It is an oppression, and pleased from the Swedish ex-minister's point about sexism, it is similar to sexism. It is deeply embedded in cultures throughout the world, our inferiority. And that isn't something that just goes away because someone has struggled through and got an education and then applies for a job. They still carry with them all the stereotypes that were there that they had to overcome in the world. So there has to be a program of training, not just for peers, but also for disabled people employed, so that they become champions of the equality of disabled people within the UN. And I think it's really important that that attitudinal side of things is taken forward, because I think it was probably because that wasn't addressed that previous attempts to do this foundered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll next go to the woman in blue.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Honorable Denita Gati. I am a Member of Parliament from Kenya, Nairobi. I'm so delighted that we are talking about a topic that is women today. I am a woman with disability and a Member of Parliament. But I can tell you, listening to the panel up in front there, and I'm thinking, the UN strategy is extremely correct, and I'm happy that the UN has decided to have a strategy for persons with disabilities. And then I'm thinking, UN is in all countries, especially in Africa. And I'm wondering, what if, for instance, what if the UN decides that within its own operations, for once, it can decide that within 2-3 years of its own operations, it is completely targeting the empowerment of persons with disabilities of the world. In children with disabilities, youth with disabilities, women with disabilities. Women in Kenya, where I come from, for example, right now as we speak, violence against women and girls with disabilities is so high up, it's crazy. We are not even talking. We have a constitution. We have a Persons with Disabilities Act in Kenya. But right now, even as we speak here, the craze has now gone to women and girls with disabilities simply because they have no voice. They are completely voiceless. They cannot defend themselves. There are rape cases. There are defilement. So we are thinking, how about the UN just deciding that for 3 years, we are just going to tackle issues disability, leave alone, we have had UN talking about climate change, persons with disabilities in climate change. What is the role? What role do we play? Then we can say, how can the UN, for example, decide to say, for ourselves, because I can see UNDP, UN Women, OCHA is there. I mean, great partners who can decide that within their support, it can just decide for 3 years, let us just focus on persons with disabilities, to just take us up there so that we are able to really say that really we really did a lot of work. How can we look at a different strategy that you can just twist it a little bit in terms of your funding to just look at disability as your agenda, completely at that agenda in all sectors that you're talking about mainstreaming. I thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'll next ask the permanent representative from Hungary to speak, and then I'll turn over to the panel, and then I'll go for a second round of comments from the floor. So Hungary, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, panelists, Your Excellencies. I would like, first of all, thank the organizers, Australia, the Executive Office of the Secretary General, as well as the co-sponsors of Argentina, Canada, and the GLAD network, and all the other organizations, DESA, UNDP, HCR, ILO, so important that we are joining forces. As member of the CRPD Conference Bureau on Accessibility, the group of friends of the CRPD, the PGA Steering Committee on Accessibility, Hungary has been very strongly and actively taking part in this issue, and we are very happy that this new strategy is in a process of manifestation, and we are celebrating here today. First of all, I really would like to congratulate Under Secretary General Ana Maria Menendez, because you probably don't know, but she was the one who is the swap, and she did a wonderful job. And we just believe that this next project, this next strategy should be as successful as the previous one. We really commend the Secretary General for this initiative and its timely delivery. Within the member states, within the whole UN system, this is a topic which, as honorable gentleman just talked about, has been in the air, in the practicalities, in the needs, in the houses, within the walls for a long time. So I think we really have to join forces. We welcome and strongly support the disability strategy and the accountability framework, which will have a transformative impact, we believe, for the benefit of persons with disabilities within the UN system, within the UN itself, madam. You have to understand this is a problem here within the UN as well, and of course in all the member states. So Hungary stands ready to lend its voice to make the strategy visible, vocal, and give it broad acknowledgement among the UN membership. We are ready to further discuss with you on the most suitable avenue to this end, and we will continue to follow closely the implementation. And we hope it won't only be beautiful words, but it will be a great implementation. We are on board. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'll actually just see if at this point any of the panel members want to respond to what's been said so far. Ms. Menendez, in the first instance.
Sure, I'll be brief. First of all, thank you to all member states that have expressed support for the strategy. As I said before, and the Secretary General said, we will need member states as we will need civil society in order to really implement this and carry it out. On the issue of why this strategy and what is really what can make really a difference here, I think that first of all is the involvement and the commitment of the Secretary General. Secondly is the accountability framework, that is an accountability framework system-wide, and the fact that there is a mechanism that it will be done temporarily, but it will be started by my office, so that there is an overseeing capacity. So those factors, of course, are new. That's, I think, the strength of the strategy, and hopefully with the cooperation of all of us will make it, really make advance and move forward. To the Kenyan parliamentarian, of course, the issue of gender and women is always something that is very important for all of us. And this is one of the priorities also of the Secretary General, and there is, as we all know, an intersectionality with the issue of gender inequality and disabilities. Also already talk about that. But I would like just to tell you that certainly you were mentioning the issue of empowerment of people with disabilities throughout the system. One of the things that the strategy pursues is to mainstream the issues of disability, so that in effect everybody in the UN system and UN country teams on the ground in your country and in others are really going to take this empowerment and this issue into consideration as a matter of, as I said, mainstreaming, so that this is a priority, and this is something that we do not need to remind every time, but that people really sort of are going to really interiorize it, assume it as part of their purviews and their daily work. Thank you.
Thank you. Would any of the other members of the panel wish to respond, or shall we take that as a one UN voice? One UN voice. All right, we'll go back to the floor then. I can see plenty of hands in front of me, but I'm just going to look to my left and right first to make sure that nobody has been excluded there. All right, the lady in white there, thank you.
So on behalf of the ITU, International Telecommunication Union, I would like to commend all efforts made by each one of the speakers, and particularly the initiative and engagement of the UN Women to increase the focus of the work and to also consider girls and women from the disability perspective as a multidimensional development of human rights issue, as mentioned by the representative of the UNDP. Perhaps this is a moment of change for all of us. Throughout the UN system and globally, CRPD implementation shows clearly be benefic for all of us, not only for persons with disabilities. So while addressing the specific needs of all persons, like children and youth, women and girls, persons with disabilities and older people, indigenous and persons living in remote areas, let's change our work from silos to a more holistic approach and thus jointly achieve this inclusive world that we all want to leave behind as our legacy for the generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, at the front here.
Oh, hello, it's Sarah Gayton from the National Federation of the Blind of the UK. Absolutely fantastic that you've launched this initiative. I'd like to report we have an accessibility crisis in the UK with the problems of urban designers, planners, architects, policy, government encouraging or allowing shared space road design. That is where accessible features in the urban environment, like a simple curb to protect the pavement, and simple equipment like a pedestrian crossing where blind people can press the button to cross the road, have been stripped away in certain towns and centres across the UK, in Scotland, in England, in Wales and in Northern Ireland. We have a pledge and a petition here that we would like to hand in to all of the UN people, and to you, Anna-Marie, please, because your passion is beyond me. We've got a petition called Safe and Accessible Environments for All. And the National Federation of the Blind of the UK want a world where blind, deafblind, visually impaired, disabled, young and older people do not have to share space with moving vehicles on the road, please. This petition and pledge was inspired by the Global Disability Summit that the UK government held last year. We had 100 representatives from the Global Summit sign that. And then we've asked organisations in the UK and internationally to sign this pledge as well, organisations. Within probably less than a week, we've had 140 national, local, regional, grassroots organisations, mostly from the UK, but also international support has pledged this. And we're talking Alzheimer's Society, we're talking Blind Veterans, we're talking Royal Blind, we're talking East Dunbartonshire Visually Impaired Group. They are, there's this absolute crisis. So we want to give this to you tomorrow when we finalise that list. But we urgently want that discussion and dialogue. And this has come about exactly what you said, is because they will not listen and really engage truly with disabled people's organisations to understand the requirements for accessibility. So what you've identified, and Vladimir, is we're suffering, really, really suffering about this in Britain. So we welcome this brilliant strategy that you're bringing out.
Thank you very much. Now, I regret that we're almost out of time, and there are a number of other hands in the room, but I'm sorry we just don't have time any further. In closing, and before I ask you all to thank the panel, but in closing I'd like to note that, as Åsa Ragnar said, a lot of work has been undertaken to get us this far. However, the launch of the strategy is simply the starting point to make the UNDIS not just a strategy of words, but a strategy of action. Something that will produce a genuine strategic partnership between the UN and people with disabilities, to borrow words from Catalina de Vandes. One of the areas we clearly need to work on is capacity building within the UN, capacity building of DPOs, capacity building of others. We all in this room, the UN member states in particular, need to take meaningful action and provide financial, political and structural support to make implementation of the UNDIS a reality. And I call upon all of us to do so. And with those closing remarks, I would like everybody to thank the panel. One of the challenges of having a panel as distinguished as the one we've been favoured with this afternoon is that they need to go in a real hurry to other appointments, and we've already lost 2 panel members so far. So for those of who are still here, please join me in thanking the panel. Thank you.